Chapter 1: Shattered Lies. Jackson Reeves, a 38-year-old structural engineer for a prestigious Boston firm, lived what most would consider a picture-perfect life. His marriage to Diana, a pharmaceutical sales representative he met during his university days, was approaching its 10th anniversary. They resided in a tastefully renovated colonial home in a quiet suburb, hosted dinner parties for their close-knit group of friends, and were beginning serious conversations about starting a family. Jackson possessed a mind that saw patterns where others saw chaos. This trait made him exceptional at his job, designing complex support systems for skyscrapers and bridges. He approached life with the same precision, calculating risks, planning for contingencies, and moving forward with confidence once he de-analyzed all variables. Some might call it cold, but Diana had always appreciated his dependability and calm approach to life challenges. Their marriage had not been perfect. No relationship is, but Jackson believed they weathered their rough patches. 3 years earlier, Diana had grown distant, working late and traveling more frequently for her job. Jackson had suspected an affair, but confronted the issue directly. Diana had tearfully assured him it was merely work stress, and they recommitted to their marriage with couples therapy and a romantic second honeymoon to Barbados. That rainy Tuesday in October began normally. Jackson woke at his usual 5:45 a.m., completed his morning run, and shared breakfast with Diana, who seemed preoccupied with an upcoming sales conference in Chicago. He kissed her goodbye, told her he loved her, and headed to the office to review structural plans for a new civic center. At 2:17 p.m., while driving to a meeting with city officials, Jackson's life changed forever. The last thing he remembered was an enormous delivery truck, running a red light and barreling toward his sedan. Then darkness. When consciousness returned, Jackson found himself in Massachusetts General Hospital, his body a catalog of injuries. Compound fractures in both legs, a shattered pelvis, 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, and a severe concussion. The doctor spoke in measured tones about his prognosis, using phrases like extensive rehabilitation and possible permanent mobility issues. Jackson threw waves of morphine dull pain, calculated his odds with cold precision. He had perhaps a 30% chance of walking normally again. Diana's reaction stunned him. She did not collapse in grief or rage against fate. Instead, she appeared almost eerily composed, squeezing his hand and whispering, "Do not worry, I'll take care of everything." Something in her voice, a certain hollowness, triggered Jackson's analytical mind, but he dismissed the thought as paranoia induced by trauma and medication. For 2 weeks, Jackson drifted between consciousness and drug-induced sleep. Diana was a constant presence during visiting hours, efficiently handling insurance paperwork, consulting with doctors, and reassuring friends of family. Jackson's parents flew in from Arizona, and his younger sister Olivia took leave from her teaching job in Rhode Island to help with his recovery. Olivia had never quite warmed to Diana, dismissing her brother's wife as superficial and calculating. Jackson had always attributed this to sisterly protectiveness, but now Olivia's concerns seemed to manifest in small ways. The tightening of her mouth when Diana spoke about insurance policies, the narrowing of her eyes when Diana took calls in the hallway. "Something's off with her, Jack," Olivia whispered one afternoon when they were alone. "She does not act like someone whose husband might never walk again. She's being strong for me," Jackson defended, though a seed of doubt had taken root. That doubt blossomed into suspicion 3 weeks after the accident. Jackson had been transferred to a rehabilitation facility where he endured grueling physical therapy sessions that left him exhausted but determined. The doctors were cautiously optimistic about his potential for recovery, impressed by his approach to rehabilitation and his unyielding determination. One night, unable to sleep due to pain and frustrated by slow progress, Jackson reached for the water glass on his bedside table. His hand knocked against Diana's purse, which she left behind after her evening visit. The purse toppled, spilling its contents across the floor. Jackson rang for the night nurse, an older woman named Beverly with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner who had taken a liking to him. She gathered Diana's scattered belongings, placing them on the bed for Jackson to return to the purse. Among the items was Diana's phone. As Beverly handed it to him, a text notification illuminated the screen. "Did you get the updated policy information?" The sender was listed as Rick W. Jackson knew no Rick and Diana's professional or personal circles, driven by a growing unease. He entered Diana's password, their anniversary date, which she used for everything despite his warnings about security. The text conversation with Rick W. unfolded like a nightmare. "Rick, did you get the updated policy information?" "Diana, yes. $2.5 million if he dies. $1.8 million for permanent disability. Rick, when can you get away tonight? Diana, after 9. He'll be medicated by then. I'll tell the nurses I'm going home to rest. Rick, we need to discuss next steps. The accident failed. Jackson's world collapsed around him. With trembling hands, he scrolled through months of messages between his wife and her lover. Messages that revealed not just an affair, but a conspiracy to kill him. The truck that hit him had not run a red light by chance. The driver, a man named Victor Ramirez with a history of DUIs, had been paid $50,000 to stage the accident. The plan had been for Jackson to die instantly, with Diana collecting his substantial life insurance policy. A policy she'd convinced him to increase just 6 months earlier. As a cold rage built within him, Jackson made a crucial decision. He would tell no one what he had discovered. Not yet. First, he would recover. Then he would plan. And finally, he would execute a revenge so complete that Diana and her lover would never see it coming. That night, after replacing the phone and Diana's purse exactly as it had been, Jackson lay awake, his mind working that had made him an exceptional engineer. He began mentally constructing a different kind of structure, not of steel and concrete, but of evidence, manipulation, and justice. The next morning, when his physical therapist asked about his renewed determination, Jackson simply said, "I found a powerful motivation to walk again." Chapter 2. Wheels in Motion. Diana visited the rehabilitation facility daily, maintaining her facade of the devoted wife. She brought homemade meals that Jackson now refused to eat, claiming hospital food agreed better with his medication. She spoke encouragingly about his eventual return home, while Jackson silently calculated the timeline of his revenge. During these visits, Jackson studied his wife with new eyes. Diana Reeves possessed a coiled energy beneath her polished exterior. A fundamental restlessness that had once attracted him but now revealed itself as something darker. At 36, she remained strikingly beautiful, with auburn haircut and a sleek bob and amber eyes that could switch from warm to calculating in an instant. Her smile, once his refuge, now seemed like a mask that occasionally slipped to reveal glimpses of impatience and disgust when she thought he was not looking. Jackson learned to sleep with one eye open. He pretended to take his pain medication but secretly disposed of it, needing his mind clear. When Diana brought food or drinks, he found ways to avoid consuming them, increasingly convinced she might attempt to poison him. 2 critical allies emerged during this period of Jackson's life. The first was Beverly Washington, the night nurse whose grandmotherly demeanor concealed a shrewd intelligence and a strong sense of justice. Beverly had worked in healthcare for 30 years and possessed an almost supernatural ability to read people. "That wife of yours," she remarked one night while checking Jackson's vitals, "remind me of a cobra I saw at the zoo. Beautiful but always calculating when strike." Jackson took a chance and confided in Beverly, showing her the text messages he photographed with a tablet as sister had brought him. Beverly's face hardened as she read them. "I've seen all kinds in this job, but this takes the cake," she said. "What are you going to do?" "Get stronger," Jackson replied. "They make sure they both pay." Beverly became his eyes and ears, noting Diana's behaviors and conversations with staff. She also agreed to introduce Jackson to her nephew, Terrell Washington, a private investigator who had previously worked for the Boston Police Department before opening his own agency. Terrell became Jackson's second ally, a burly man with a shaved head, penetrating eyes, and a personal code that placed loyalty above all else. When Jackson explained his situation, Terrell did not immediately offer help. "Revenge is a poison, man," he said. "I've seen it destroy the person seeking it more often than their target." "This is not about revenge," Jackson lied. "It's about justice." Terrell studied him for a long moment. "No, it's about revenge. But sometimes revenge and justice look the same." He nodded slowly. "I'm in, but we do this my way. Legal where possible and with an exit strategy." With Terrell's help, Jackson began gathering intelligence. Diana's lover, Rick W., was Richard Whitman, a financial advisor at the firm that managed Jackson's considerable investment portfolio and insurance policies. Richard had a reputation as a risk-taker with expensive tastes that exceeded his income, a weakness Diana had apparently exploited to draw him into their conspiracy. Through careful investigation, Terrell discovered that Diana and Richard's relationship dated back nearly 4 years, predating their supposed rough patch and a reconciliation Jackson had believed was genuine. More disturbingly, Richard had a history of clients dying under questionable circumstances, though nothing had ever been proven. Meanwhile, Jackson applied his engineer's determination to his physical recovery, pushing himself beyond what his doctors thought possible. He channeled his rage in a healing, visualizing each step as bringing him closer to retribution. While doctors had initially given him a 30% chance of walking normally again, Jackson defied the odds. Within 4 months, he progressed from wheelchair to walker, then to crutches, and finally to a cane. Dr. Eliza Patel, his lead physician, called his recovery remarkable, but warned against pushing too hard. The body needs time to heal completely, she cautioned. Determination is important, but so is patience. Jackson nodded politely while ignoring her advice. Patience was a luxury he could not afford. Each night, he exercised in secret, building strength in his damaged legs and upper body. Each day, he charted Diana and Richard's movements, building a comprehensive picture of their relationship, routines, and vulnerabilities. One crucial piece of the puzzle came from Victor Ramirez, the truck driver who had nearly killed Jackson. Terrell located him, living lavishly in a Miami Beach apartment, spending the blood money he received for the attempted murder. Through carefully applied pressure, involving evidence of his previous crimes that Terrell had obtained, Victor confessed to the conspiracy and agreed to testify that Richard and Diana had hired him. However, Jackson did not immediately take this evidence to the police. A simple arrest and criminal trial seemed too merciful for what Diana and Richard had attempted. They had not just tried to kill him, they betrayed his trust in the most fundamental way possible. Such a betrayal demanded a response beyond what the justice system could provide. 5 months after the accident, Jackson was deemed well enough to return home, though he would continue outpatient physical therapy. Diana made a show of preparing the house, converting Jackson's home office into a ground-floor bedroom, since navigating stairs remained difficult. "Everything will be just like before," Diana promised, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "We'll get through this together." "Yes," Jackson agreed, his own smile equally false. Together, the night before his discharge, Beverly visited Jackson during her break. "You sure you want to go home with that woman?" she asked bluntly. "You've got enough evidence to put her away now." Jackson looked at the devoted nurse who had become something of a surrogate mother during his recovery. "I'm sure, Beverly. Some debts not be paid with prison time alone." Beverly studied him, concern evident in her eyes. "Just remember, revenge has a way of changing a person. Do not lose yourself in it." "I will not," Jackson promised, though he was not entirely convinced. The man he'd been 5 months ago, trusting, optimistic, ethical to a fault, already seemed like a stranger. In his place stood someone harder, someone willing to cross lines the old Jackson would never have approached. As he prepared to leave the rehabilitation facility, Jackson reflected on the blueprint for revenge he had meticulously designed. Like any good structural plan, it accounted for various stress points and potential failures. It would require timing, careful manipulation, and a willingness to be as ruthless as those who tried to destroy him. The wheels were in motion. Diana and Richard believed they were welcoming home a weakened, unsuspecting victim. Instead, they were inviting in their destruction. Dressed in a familiar form of man, they had grievously underestimated. Chapter 3 House of Cards. Jackson's homecoming resembled a theater production where only he knew everyone was acting. Diana had arranged a small gathering of their closest friends, most of whom Jackson now viewed with suspicion, wondering if any had known about her betrayal. She played the role of devoted wife flawlessly, helping Jackson navigate the house with his cane, serving his favorite foods, and publicly doting on him while privately maintaining her distance. Their bedroom became separate territories within shared walls. Diana claimed Jackson's restless nights disturb her sleep, so she often retreated to the guest room. This arrangement suited Jackson perfectly, as it allowed him to continue his private strengthening exercises and make late-night calls to Terry without arousing suspicion. Within the first week home, Jackson confirmed his suspicions that Diana was still seeing Richard regularly. She would leave the house, claiming to meet friends for dinner, or attend pharmaceutical conferences, but Tari surveillance placed her at Richard's downtown condo on each occasion. The betrayal, though expected, still cut deeply. Jackson's plan required him to maintain the illusion that he suspected nothing while gathering irrefutable evidence of their conspiracy. He installed hidden cameras throughout the house, focusing on his study where Diana often made private calls when she thought he was a physical therapy. He placed a GPS tracker on her car and employed specialized spyware on their home computer to monitor her communications. 1 month after returning home, Jackson made his first calculated move. During dinner, a rare occasion when Diana actually cooked instead of bringing takeout, he casually mentioned his life insurance policy. "I've been thinking," he said, pushing food around his plate. "With my condition and the ongoing medical expenses, we should review our insurance coverage. I'm not sure my current policy is adequate anymore." Diana's fork paused halfway to her mouth, her amber eyes sharpening with interest. "What did you have in mind?" "I want to increase my life insurance," Jackson replied. "Maybe double or triple the current amount. Give him my injuries. I'm considered higher risk now, but my insurance agent thinks we can make a case based on my recovery progress." The flash of naked greed in Diana's eyes was so brief that Jackson would have missed it, had he not been watching for exactly this reaction. She quickly composed her features into a mask of concern. "Are you worried about something, Jack? The doctor said you recovering well." Jackson shrugged, projecting vulnerability. "I just want to make sure you've taken care of if anything happens. My mobility might never be what it was. My earning potential could be affected long term." Diana reached across the table to squeeze his hand, her touch sending involuntary revulsion through him. "That's thoughtful, but let's not think about worst-case scenarios. You're getting stronger every day." Still, Jackson insisted. "I feel better knowing everything's in order. Would you mind setting up a meeting with Richard? I trust his advice on this." The mention of her lover's name caused a nearly imperceptible tightening around Diana's eyes. "Of course, I'll call him tomorrow." That night, Jackson heard Diana's hushed conversation from the guest bedroom. Thanks to the hidden microphones, he recorded every word of her excited call to Richard. "He wants to increase his life insurance substantially," she whispered, "and he specifically asked for you to handle it." Richard's voice came through clearly. "Did he give any indication he suspects anything?" "None. He's completely clueless. Just concerned about providing for me if his condition worsens." Diana's laugh held a cruelty that pierced Jackson's heart despite his preparation. "As if I'll need providing for once we together." "We need to be careful," Richard cautioned. "No changes to the plan. We wait until he's approved for the increased coverage. Then move forward with Plan B since the accident did not work." "I'm tired of waiting," Diana complained. "He's so pathetic now, shuffling around with that cane, always in pain. Sleeping in the same house with him makes my skin crawl. Patience, baby, a few more months, and we'll have everything. The money, the freedom, and each other. No more sneaking around." Jackson listened to them plotting his murder with clinical detachment, recording every incriminating word. The next day, he met with his actual insurance agent. Not Richard, to discuss a policy increase. But with one significant change, he secretly removed Diana as beneficiary, replacing her with a trust that would benefit several charities in the event of his death. The meeting with Richard took place the following week in their home study. Jackson observed how the financial advisor's professional demeanor occasionally slipped when their eyes met, revealing flashes of either guilt or contempt. Jackson could not decide which was worse. Richard Whitman embodied everything Jackson was not: charismatic, physically imposing, and comfortable with risk. At 42, he maintained a physique of a former college athlete. His blonde hair artfully styled to conceal thinning spots. His tailored suit and Italian leather shoes broadcast success, while his perfect white smile projected trustworthiness that Jackson now recognized as utterly false. "This policy increase should be straightforward," Richard explained, sliding papers across the desk. "Given your assets and income level, increasing to $5 million in coverage makes perfect sense, especially considering your medical situation." Jackson noted how Richard emphasized certain words medical situation with barely concealed satisfaction. He signed the papers with a hand he forced not to tremble with rage. "Thank you for making this so easy," Jackson said, meeting Richard's eyes. It's good to know Diana and I can count on you. A flash of discomfort crossed Richard's face. That's what I'm here for. To protect your family's future. After Richard left, Jackson contacted Terrell. They've taken the bait. Now we accelerate the timeline. Over the next 3 weeks, Jackson strategically worsened his apparent condition. He complained of increasing pain. Accidentally fell twice when Diana was present and visited his doctor with concerns about potential complications. All while continuing his secret strengthening regimen and finalizing the complex web he was weaving around Diana and Richard. Jackson's most crucial ally during this phase became Assistant District Attorney Sophia Brennan, a former classmate from college who specialized in complex financial crimes and attempted murder cases. Terrell had vetted her thoroughly before Jackson reached out, ensuring she had no connections to Richard or Diana. When Jackson presented his evidence, the recorded conversations, Victor Ramirez's confession, the financial trail showing Richard's manipulation of Jackson's accounts, and documentation of the suspicious deaths of Richard's previous clients. Sophia was stunned. "This is extraordinarily thorough," she said, reviewing the files that are office after hours. "Most victims do not document their cases this comprehensively." "Most victims do not have my particular skills," Jackson replied. "Or on my motivation," Sophia frowned. "Why have not you come forward sooner? Every day you spend in that house with her, you're in danger." "I need a complete evidence," Jackson explained. "Not just of the accident, but of their ongoing conspiracy. And I needed to understand the full scope, including whether Richard has done this before. Based on what you've uncovered about his previous clients, it appears he has." Sophia confirmed. "We'll need to exhume bodies, review old cases. This could become a major investigation." "I understand," Jackson said, "but I need something from you first." Sophia looked at him rarely. "What time? Do not move on this for exactly 2 weeks. I have financial matters to put in order before everything explodes." Sophia studied him with prosecutorial sharpness. "You're not planning something illegal, are you? Because I see a not be part of that." Jackson met her gaze steadily. "Nothing illegal, just ensuring that when they fall, they lose everything, not just their freedom." Reluctantly, Sophia agreed to the delay, though she insisted Jackson take additional precautions to ensure his safety. 2 weeks, she emphasized, then we move regardless of whether your financial matters are concluded. As Jackson left her office, he reflected on how completely his life had transformed in 6 months. The man who entered that meeting was not the same one who had kissed his wife goodbye on that rainy October morning. That man had died in the crash, replaced by someone capable of orchestrating the complete destruction of the woman he had once loved and the man who had helped her betray him. The final phase was about to begin. The house of cards Diana and Richard had built was about to collapse, and Jackson would ensure they were buried in the ruins. Chapter 4: The Architect of Vengeance. During the agreed-upon 2-week window before Sophia Brennan would act on the evidence, Jackson executed the financial aspects of his revenge with surgical precision. As a successful engineer with substantial savings and investments, Jackson had accumulated considerable wealth, most of which Diana expected to control after his death. Now he systematically ensured she would be left with nothing. Working with his longtime attorney Harold Greenberg, a sharp-minded septuagenarian with a reputation for absolute discretion, Jackson revised his will, removing Diana as beneficiary and executor. He transferred assets to irrevocable trusts, liquidated investments, and restructured his finances to protect them from the inevitable legal battles ahead. "You understand that Diana could contest these changes," Harold warned during a private meeting at his downtown office, "especially if they occur right before criminal charges." "She can contest all she wants," Jackson replied. "The law is clear: attempted murder disqualifies his spouse from inheritance. Even if the attempt is not immediately discovered, and I've documented her betrayal thoroughly." Harold nodded, though concern lined his weathered face. "Just be careful, Jackson. I've seen revenge consume better men than you." "This is not just revenge," Jackson insisted, though the distinction grew blurrier with each passing day. "It's justice," simultaneously. Jackson worked with Terrell to gather the final pieces of evidence against Richard. The financial advisor's history revealed a disturbing pattern. 3 previous clients had died under questionable circumstances after increasing their life insurance policies substantially. In each case, Richard had managed the policies and had connections to the beneficiaries. Though these relationships had been carefully concealed, one case particularly haunted Jackson: Lawrence Peterson, a 58-year-old widow who had allegedly committed suicide 3 months after quadrupling his life insurance coverage. The sole beneficiary was his much younger girlfriend, Veronica Slater, who had disappeared shortly after collecting the payout. Terrell's investigation uncovered evidence suggesting Veronica had been involved with Richard before Lawrence's death and that the suicide may have been staged. "We should take this to Sophia immediately," Terrell urged after presenting his findings. "This guy is not just trying to kill you. He's a serial predator." 2 more days, Jackson insisted. Everything needs to collapse simultaneously. The final piece of Jackson's plan involved Victor Ramirez, the truck driver who had nearly killed him. Currently living in Florida under Richard's protection, Victor represented both a crucial witness and a potential threat. If Richard suspected Jackson was building a case, Victor would be the first person he'd silence. Working through Terrell's connections, Jackson arranged for Victor to be brought back to Massachusetts under the pretense of a lucrative drug trafficking opportunity, a ruse designed to appeal to Victor's greed while keeping Richard unaware. Once in Boston, Victor would be taken into protective custody and formally deposed about the conspiracy. At home, Jackson maintained his performance as an increasingly disabled husband unaware of his wife's betrayal. He tracked Diana's movements with GPS, recorded her conversations with Richard, and documented their ongoing plot to end his life. Their new plan involved a gradually escalating dosage of untraceable toxins in Jackson's food, specifically targeting his weakened system to mimic complications from his injuries. Richard had apparently sourced the substance through criminal connections, and Diana had begun administering minute amounts in Jackson's evening tea. Jackson had anticipated this possibility and had been secretly analyzing his food and drinks. When he confirmed the presence of poison, he began to discreetly collect samples as evidence while replacing his meals and beverages when Diana was not watching. 10 days into the 2-week window, Diana made a critical mistake. Believing Jackson was a physical therapy, she invited Richard to their home during daylight hours, something they had previously avoided. Jackson, who had deliberately canceled his appointment without telling Diana, returned home unexpectedly. He entered silently through the garage, alerted by the security system on his phone that showed an unauthorized visitor. Using his cane more as a potential weapon than a support, Jackson moved quietly through the house, activating the hidden recording devices with his phone. Diana and Richard were in the kitchen, their casual domesticity more painful to witness than Jackson had anticipated. Richard leaned against the counter, drinking coffee from Jackson's favorite mug while Diana prepared lunch. "The poison is working slower than you promised," Diana was saying, her tone accusatory. "He should be showing more serious symptoms by now." Richard shrugged. "His system might be processing it differently because of his medications. We need to be patient. Increasing the dosage too quickly would raise his patience." "I'm tired of being patient," Diana snapped. "I'm tired of playing nursemaid to a man I see not stand. I want him gone and the money in our accounts." Richard pulled her close, kissing her with a possessiveness that sent rage coursing through Jackson's veins. "Soon, baby, 1 month max. The doctors will attribute it to complications from his injuries. No autopsy, no questions." "What about the new insurance policy?" Diana asked. "Has it been approved?" "Final paperwork came through yesterday. $5 million. All set to come to you as his devoted widow." Richard laughed. "Per bastard signed his own death warrant." Jackson recorded every word, every gesture, while fighting the urge to confront them immediately. The engineer in him knew timing was everything. Striking too soon would collapse the structure of his revenge before all elements were in place. He retreated silently, leaving the house undetected and driving to Terrell's office, where he added the new recording to their evidence cache. "That's it," Terrell declared. "We've got them cold on conspiracy charges, attempted murder, and now poisoning. Call Sophia today." Jackson nodded, his expression grim. "It's time. But first, help me with one more thing." That evening, Jackson returned home and performed his most convincing act yet. He accepted the toxic tea from Diana's hands, pretending to drink it while she watched. Then, an hour later, he staged a severe medical episode, convulsions followed by unconsciousness that sent a panicked Diana calling for an ambulance. At the hospital, Jackson secretly alerted Dr. Patel to test for specific toxins. The results confirmed what he already knew. He was being systematically poisoned. Dr. Patel, bound by medical ethics, contacted authorities immediately. When Diana arrived at the hospital the next morning, she found not her weak husband, but detectives waiting to question her about the suspicious substances in Jackson's system. Though initially detained, Diana was released pending further investigation, exactly as Jackson had planned. He wanted her free just long enough to make desperate moves that would further incriminate both her and Richard. Jackson remained hospitalized for observation, using the safe location to coordinate with Sophia Brennan. The assistant district attorney, armed with comprehensive evidence and the toxicology report, began preparing warrants for Diana and Richard arrests, as well as for the exhumation of Richard's previous clients. "We move tomorrow," Sophia informed Jackson during hospital visit. Simultaneous arrests, maximum media coverage. Richard would not be able to destroy evidence or flee. Jackson nodded, satisfied that the legal framework of his revenge was solidifying. However, criminal charges represented only one aspect of his plan. The complete devastation he envisioned extended beyond prison sentences to financial ruin, public humiliation, and the destruction of everything Diana and Richard valued. From his hospital bed, Jackson initiated the final countermeasures. He contacted financial regulators with evidence of Richard's fraudulent practices, launched civil lawsuits against both conspirators, and released damning information to select a journalist who had been cultivated for this purpose. By the time Diana returned home from the hospital, finding herself locked out of account she had expected to control and served with divorce papers that detailed her infidelity and murder attempts, the news was already tightening. When she frantically called Richard, she reached only his voicemail. He was already being questioned by investigators about the deaths of his previous clients. Jackson checked himself out of the hospital against medical advice, secluding himself in a secure location known only to Terror and Sophia. From this command center, he watched through surveillance cameras as police executed search warrants at his former home and at Richard's condo in office. The evidence recovered was devastating, not just against Diana and Richard, but implicating Richard in the deaths of 3 former clients. The financial advisor's carefully constructed world collapsed with remarkable speed as former associates scrambled to distance themselves and regulatory agencies' frozen assets. Diana, confronted with mounting evidence and abandoned by Richard, who was attempting to negotiate leniency by offering information against her, made a desperate attempt to flee. Terrell's surveillance team tracked her to Boston's Logan Airport, where authorities intercepted her attempting to board a flight to the Cayman Islands using tickets purchased with Jackson's credit card. Her arrest, captured by news cameras and promptly broadcast across local and then national media, represented the first public chapter of a scandal that would captivate Boston for months. The story had everything: betrayal, attempted murder, poison, a serial financial predator, and a victim who had orchestrated an elaborate counter-conspiracy to bring his would-be killers to justice. As Jackson watched Diana being led away in handcuffs, he felt not triumph but a hollow exhaustion. The architect of his vengeance had designed a perfect structure of retribution, but now found himself wondering what he would build next and whether anything could fill the void left by such complete betrayal. Chapter 5 Counter-moves. The arrests of Diana Reeves and Richard Whitman dominated Boston media. Headlines screamed about the insurance Black Widow and the financial advisor of death, while morning shows dissected every salacious detail of their affair and murder conspiracy. Jackson, who had once valued his privacy, now found his personal tragedy transformed into public entertainment. Sophia Brennan, recognizing the potential impact on future jury pools, leveraged the media attention strategically. She held a press conference outlining the charges: conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, assault with intent to kill, insurance fraud, and poisoning. For Richard, the charge is extended to similar crimes involving his previous clients. These individuals executed a cold, calculated plan to kill Mr. Reeves for financial gain, Sophia stated, her voice steady before the bank of microphones. Evidence suggests this may not be an isolated incident, but part of a pattern of targeting wealthy clients. Jackson watched the press conference from Terrell's office, studying the public reaction. The narrative had been carefully shaped to position him as the resilient victim who had outwitted his would-be killers, a portrayal that served as purposes perfectly. While Diana remained in custody, denied bail due to flight risk, Richard's high-powered legal team secured his release on a $2 million bond. This temporary freedom played directly into Jackson's plan. Richard would now take desperate measures to salvage what remained his assets and reputation, creating opportunities for further incrimination. Jackson's revenge extended beyond criminal charges. Working with Harold Greenberg, he filed civil lawsuits against both Diana and Richard, seeking damages for emotional distress, medical costs, and attempted wrongful death. Simultaneously, he provided evidence to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority regarding Richard's numerous violations. We're not just going to see them imprisoned. Jackson explained to Terrell as they reviewed progress on multiple fronts. We're going to ensure they lose everything. Money, reputation, freedom. When they eventually released, they'll re-enter a world where their names are synonymous with betrayal. Terrell's study is client with growing concern. And after that, what happens when they lost everything? Jackson did not answer immediately. In truth, he had not thought much beyond the execution of his revenge. His entire existence had narrowed to this single purpose: the complete destruction of those who had betrayed him. 3 days after the arrests, an unexpected development threatened to derail Jackson's carefully constructed plans. Richard's attorney, Preston Hargrove, a shark-like defense lawyer known for representing Boston's elite, requested an emergency meeting with Sophia Brennan. Sophia immediately contacted Jackson. Richard wants to deal. He's offering testimony against Diana in exchange for reduced charges. What exactly is he claiming? Jackson asked, maintaining his composure despite the potential complication. He says Diana masterminded everything. That she approached him with a plan already formed and manipulated him into participating. He's positioning himself as another victim of her manipulation. Jackson considered this development. What's your assessment? It's bullshit, Sophia replied bluntly. Our evidence clearly shows Richard was involved in similar schemes before meeting Diana. But his testimony would strengthen our case against her. No deal, Jackson said firmly. We have enough to convict them both without rewarding either with leniency. Sophia hesitated. That's not entirely your decision, Jackson. The district attorney will have the final say. Then convince the DA. Jackson insisted. Richard is the more dangerous of the two. Diana wanted to kill one person. Richard has left a trail of bodies. Sophia promised to advocate against any deal, but warned that prosecutorial decisions would ultimately be based on legal strategy, not Jackson's desire for comprehensive vengeance. This potential derailment forced Jackson to accelerate other aspects of his plan. Working with Terrell, he tracked down Veronica Slater, the girlfriend of Lawrence Peterson, one of Richard's previous victims, now living under an assumed name in San Diego. When Terrell approached her, Veronica initially denied any knowledge of Richard Whitman. However, faced with evidence linking her to the financial advisor before Lawrence's death, she eventually cracked. Richard said no one would get hurt. She confessed tearfully. He promised Lawrence would just go to sleep peacefully. I never thought. Her voice trailed off. Veronica's testimony, secured with promises of immunity arranged through Sophia, demolished Richard's claim of being manipulated by Diana. Additionally, forensic accountants uncovered offshore account containing millions in stolen funds from Richard's various schemes, further establishing his role as a predator rather than a victim. While legal proceedings moved forward, Jackson faced challenges on the personal front. His physical condition, neglected during his single-minded focus on revenge, deteriorated. The constant stress and inadequate self-care caused setbacks in his recovery, forcing him to resume intensive physical therapy. Dr. Patel confronted him during an appointment. Your body not heal properly under this kind of stress. The revenge you're pursuing is damaging you physically. What would you have me do? Jackson asked, genuine confusion in his voice. Forgive them? Move on. I'm not suggesting forgiveness, Dr. Patel clarified. Just recognition that your health must take priority over punishment. They're facing justice now. Let the system handle it while you focus on healing. Jackson nodded non-committally, though he had no intention of stepping back. The system might handle the criminal aspects, but only he could ensure the comprehensive devastation he had designed. Meanwhile, Diana attempted her own count of moves from jail. Through her court-appointed attorney, she reached out to Jackson with a proposal. In exchange for his recommendation of leniency and a favorable divorce settlement, she would provide evidence about other crimes Richard had committed. Jackson met with her attorney, Martin Bailey, a weary public defender with too many cases and too little time. My client believes she has valuable information that could benefit the broader investigation, Bailey explained, clearly uncomfortable with his role as intermediary. What information specifically? Jackson asked, maintaining a neutral expression. She claims knowledge of financial crimes involving prominent Boston families. Clients Mr. Whitman targeted but did not manage to harm. Information that could prevent future victims. Jackson considered the offer, recognizing Diana's desperate attempt to secure some leverage. Tell Ms. Reeves I'll consider her information under one condition. She provides a full, recorded confession of her role in the conspiracy against me. with no attempts to minimize her culpability. Bailey looks surprised. She's unlikely to incriminate herself further without guarantees. Those are my terms, Jackson stated flatly. Her information is worthless otherwise. As expected, Diana rejected the counter-offer, unwilling to strengthen the case against herself without concrete benefits. Her refusal perfectly served Jackson's purposes. It demonstrated her continued self-interest over any genuine remorse or desire to prevent harm to others. Richard's counter-moves proved more sophisticated and dangerous. Released on bail and watching his empire crumble, he mobilized remaining resources against Jackson. First came legal maneuvers. Countersuits alleging defamation and business interference. Then more direct threats delivered through intermediaries to terror. Back off or face consequences. When legal intimidation failed, Richard escalated. Terrell's office was broken into, though the crucial evidence was secured in multiple locations. Jackson's temporary residence received threatening letters. Most alarmingly, Beverly Washington reported being followed by suspicious individuals after leaving her shift at the rehabilitation facility. Jackson responded by increasing security for everyone involved in the case. He hired professional protection for Beverly, moved Terrell's operations to a more secure location, and relocated himself to a building with advanced security systems. These protective measures drained Jackson's finances but strengthened the legal case against Richard, adding witness intimidation to his growing list of charges. Sophia successfully petitioned the court to revoke Richard's bail based on these threats, returning him to custody alongside Diana. With both conspirators jailed and preliminary hearings approaching, Jackson might have stepped back to allow the legal process to unfold. Instead, he intensified his efforts, determined to ensure that neither Diana nor Richard retained any resources or support systems. He systematically contacted their friends, colleagues, and family members, sharing evidence of their crimes and ensuring complete social isolation. He provided financial records to regulatory agencies, resulting in lifetime bans from the securities industry for Richard and several associates. He even exposed Diana's professional misconduct to the pharmaceutical company where she had worked, leading to a corporate investigation and public disavowal of their former sales star. 10 weeks after the arrests, Jackson finally returned to the colonial house he had once shared with Diana. The home had been processed as a crime scene and then left vacant. A shrine to a marriage that had been a fatal illusion. As Jackson moved through the silent rooms, leaning less heavily on his cane than yet months earlier, memories surfaced like ghosts. Diana laughing in the kitchen. Their housewarming party, plans to discuss on the back deck for children who would never exist. Despite everything, grief ambushed him, not for the loss of Diana she actually was, but for the loss of who he believed her to be. In the master bedroom, Jackson found Diana's jewelry box still sitting on the dresser. Opening it revealed the anniversary gift he had given her 2 years earlier. A platinum necklace with a custom pendant representing the constellation visible on their wedding night. The sentiment behind the gift now seemed painfully naive. Jackson closed the box firmly and made a decision. He would sell the house. This place held nothing for him now except painful memories and betrayal. The proceeds would help fund the ongoing legal battle and eventually a fresh start somewhere new. As he prepared to leave, Jackson noticed a loose floorboard in Diana's closet, something that would have escaped attention during the police search. Curious, he pried it up and discovered a small fireproof box containing documents Diana had apparently wanted to keep hidden. A second passport under a different name, account information for a secret offshore bank account. And most disturbingly, research on untraceable poisons dating back 3 years. Far earlier than the beginning of the conspiracy Jackson had uncovered. This discovery suggested something even more sinister. That Diana might have been considering his murder long before the actual attempt. It raised uncomfortable questions about their entire relationship and whether she had ever truly loved him at all. Jackson provided these materials to Sophia, who incorporated them into the prosecution's case. The evidence of long-term permutation eliminated any possibility of claiming the murder plot was a spontaneous mistake or momentary lapse in judgment. As preliminary hearings began, Jackson took his place in the courtroom, watching Diana and Richard being led in wearing orange jumpsuits and handcuffs. Diana refused to meet his gaze, staring straight ahead with the same composed expression she had maintained throughout their marriage. Richard, however, glared at Jackson with undisguised hatred. His once polished appearance now haggard from weeks in custody. The proceedings confirmed what Jackson had engineered. Both defendants would stand trial for attempted murder and conspiracy, with Richard facing additional charges related to his previous victims. Bail was denied for both, ensuring they would remain imprisoned until trial and likely for decades afterward. Jackson should have felt triumphant. The legal machinery he had set in motion was functioning precisely as designed. Diana and Richard faced not just criminal prosecution but complete personal and professional destruction. His revenge was unfolding with mathematical precision. Yet as he left the courthouse leaning on his cane while reporters shouted questions about his incredible story of survival and justice, Jackson felt strangely hollow. The architect of vengeance had created a perfect structure of retribution but found himself wondering what foundation remained for his own future. Chapter 6 Crossfire. As legal proceedings against Diana and Richard intensified, Jackson discovered that revenge, once unleashed, could not be precisely controlled. Like a complex demolition, the collapse created unexpected debris that threatened to harm unintended targets, including Jackson himself. The most immediate collateral damage appeared in Jackson's professional life. Despite being the victim, he found his engineering firm increasingly uncomfortable with his involvement in such a high-profile criminal case. Clients concerned about negative publicity began requesting different project managers. Partners expressed worry about the firm's reputation becoming entangled with a sensational attempted murder case. Louis Donovan, the managing partner in Jackson's longtime mentor, requested a private meeting at his club, a wood-panel establishment that had admitted its first black member only 15 years earlier. A fact Louis seemed oblivious to when suggesting the venue. "The partners and I have discussed your situation," Louis began after ordering drinks. "We all horrified by what happened to you, of course. Absolutely unconscionable." Jackson recognized the prelude to bad news. But Louis sighed, swirling a scotch. "But the publicity is creating complications. Clients are concerned about stability. Your recovery still requires significant attention. Your focus, understandably, is divided." "You want me to take a leave of absence," Jackson stated flatly, "with full benefits and a guarantee to review your position in 6 months. Louis Hurley added, "We're not abandoning you, Jackson. We're just creating space for everyone to move forward appropriately." Jackson felt a familiar coldness settled over him, the same detachment that had allowed him to plan Diana and Richard's destruction. 6 months without work while I'm dealing with significant medical expenses and legal costs. How precisely does that help me move forward appropriately? Louis looked uncomfortable. "The firm will provide some financial support, of course, and your disability insurance is being contested by the company because the injuries resulted from an attempted murder," Jackson interrupted, "which you would know if you actually been concerned about my welfare rather than the firm's image." The meeting ended with strained cordiality and a carefully worded separation agreement that Jackson refused to sign immediately. The professional exile represented another loss in a growing inventory. His marriage, his health, his sense of security, and now his career, at least temporarily. Meanwhile, the legal battle expanded beyond criminal proceedings. Richard's former employer, Beacon Financial Advisors, filed suit against Jackson for defamation and tortious interference, claiming his public accusations had damaged their business. Though the suit lacked merit, truth being an absolute defense against defamation, it required legal responses that further drained Jackson's resources and energy. More disturbingly, anonymous threats began targeting those helping Jackson. Beverly Washington discovered her car's brake lines have been tampered with. Fortunately, before any harm occurred, Terrell's teenage daughter received threatening messages at her high school. Even Dr. Patel reported suspicious individuals photographing her entering and leaving the hospital. The police attributed these intimidation attempts to associate of Richard Whitman, particularly after tracing payments from his hidden accounts to known criminals. Additional charges were filed, but the message was clear: Richard retained influence even from jail and was escalating the conflict beyond legal boundaries. Sophia Brennan urged Jackson to consider witness protection. "These people have proven they're willing to kill," she reminded him, "and Richard still has resources and connections we have not identified." Jackson refused. Going into hiding would be seen as a victory for them. "I will not live in fear." Instead, he increased security measures, moving between different secure locations and maintaining irregular patterns. He also accelerated efforts to dismantle Richard's remaining support network, working with federal investigators to identify and freeze additional hidden assets. 12 weeks after the arrests, Jackson faced Diana across a conference table for divorce proceedings. Though criminal charges took precedence, the divorce moved forward simultaneously with Diana contesting Jackson's claims despite overwhelming evidence of her infidelity and murder attempts. Diana had transformed during her time in custody. The polished, controlled woman was gone, replaced by someone with hollow cheeks and dull eyes. Her once perfect appearance now institutional and severe. Yet when she spoke, her voice carried the same manipulative charm Jackson had once found captivating. "I still love you, Jack," she said when their attorney stepped out briefly. Everything got so twisted, but underneath it all, what we had was real. Jackson studied her, searching for any hint of the woman he believed her to be. Was any of real Diana? Was there ever a moment when you actually loved me? Something flickered behind her eyes, perhaps genuine emotion, perhaps another performance. The first 2 years were real. Before I met Richard, before things changed, I did love you then. What changed? Jackson asked, surprising himself with a question. He had assumed financial motivation alone explained her betrayal. Diana hesitated. You were always so measured, so controlled. Life with you was like living inside a perfectly engineered system where nothing unexpected ever happened. I felt like I was suffocating in your perfection. The answer struck Jackson more painfully than he anticipated. Not because it justified her actions. Nothing could, but because it contained a kernel of truth he recognized. His approach to life, risk-averse, planned, have been integral to his professional success, but perhaps it created an emotional sterility Diana had found unbearable. So you decided murder was preferable to divorce, he asked, his voice level despite the turmoil beneath. It was not like that at first, Diana insisted. Richard made everything seem exciting, dangerous. The planning, the risk, it was intoxicating. By the time I realized how far we'd gone, it felt impossible to turn back. Jackson saw the manipulation in her words, the attempt to shift blame, minimize responsibility, and perhaps create sympathy that might later translate into lenient sensing. Yet beneath the manipulation lay insights about their marriage he could not entirely dismiss. The divorce proceedings concluded with Diana receiving nothing, no alimony, no property division, no consideration beyond the bare minimum required by law for a spouse convicted of attempting to murder their partner. Jackson felt no triumph. Only relief that one more connection between them had been severed. As criminal trial preparations advanced, both Diana and Richard sought plea bargains, hoping to avoid the maximum sentences their charges carried. Richard offered information about financial crimes involving prominent Bostonians. Diana attempted to position herself as Richard's victim, manipulated into the conspiracy through emotional and psychological coercion. Sophia consulted Jackson about these offers. Richard's information could help us prosecute major financial crimes. Diana's testimony would strengthen the case against Richard. There's prosecutorial value in both deals and a betrayal of justice in both, Jackson countered. They tried to kill me twice. They poisoned me. They planned every detail of my death for their financial benefit. Why should either receive leniency? So, be aside. The criminal justice system is not built around personal vengeance, Jackson. It's about strategic prosecutorial decisions and resource management. Trials are expensive and risky. So is attempted murder, Jackson replied coldly. Despite Jackson's objections, the district attorney ultimately approved a limited deal for Richard. Reduced charges on some counts in exchange for testimony against other financial criminals and full cooperation regarding Diana's involvement. The agreement still ensured Richard would serve at least 20 years before possibility of parole, but Jackson saw it as a compromise of justice. Diana received no such offer, particularly after evidence from the hidden floor compartment established her long-term premeditation. With her trial data approaching and Richard now testify against her, Diana made a final desperate move. She attempted suicide in her cell. The attempt, while serious, was not fatal. Diana was hospitalized under guard. Her trial delayed while she underwent psychiatric evaluation. Mental health professionals diagnosed severe depression and narcissistic personality disorder. Finding her defense team planned to use to support claims of diminished capacity. This development created uncomfortable complications for Jackson. Public sympathy, which had strongly favored him as the victim, began showing cracks as media coverage painted Diana as mentally ill and potentially not fully responsible for her actions. Op-eds questioned the ethics of pursuing maximum charges against someone with psychiatric issues. Jackson's relentless pursuit of both legal and financial retribution was reframed by some as cruel and excessive. Beverly Washington, who had become something of surrogate mother to Jackson, voiced concerns during a rare dinner outside the rehabilitation facility. "You letting this consume you, Jack?" she said, her direct manner unchanged by their evolving relationship. "Every waking moment focused on their destruction. It's changing who you are." "They tried to kill me," Jackson reminded her. "They poisoned me. They would have watched me die without remorse." "I know what they did," Beverly replied calmly. "I've seen the evidence, held your hand through the worst of it. But vengeance is eating you alive just as surely as that poison did." "What does it end? When are convicted?" "When they lost everything." "When are dead?" Jackson had no answer. The truth, which he barely acknowledged even to himself, was that he was not sure he could stop. The architectural of his revenge had become his purpose, his identity, his reason for continuing his recovery. Without it, what remained? The question haunted him as Diana's rescheduled trial finally began. The courtroom became theater, with media coverage broadcasting every development to a public simultaneously repelled and fascinated by the case. Richard, as part of his plea agreement, testified in excruciating detail about their conspiracy, portraying Diana as the primary instigator while minimizing his own extensive criminal history. Jackson attended every day, watching him passively as his private tragedy became public entertainment. He testified about discovering the plot, about the poisoning, about the physical and emotional devastation he had experienced. Under cross-examination, Diana's attorney attempted to portray Jackson's comprehensive revenge as evidence of his own disturbed mental state, suggesting the entire case represented escalating retribution between equally troubled individuals. Sophia objected vehemently to this characterization, and the judge largely sustained her objections. Nevertheless, the defense strategy introduced doubt about the narrative that had seemed so clear-cut months earlier. 4 weeks into the trial, as prosecutors prepared for closing arguments, Jackson received an unexpected visitor at his secure residence. Olivia, his younger sister, had returned from a teaching position abroad that had prevented her involvement in the earlier stages of the case. "Jesus, Jack," she said, embracing him tightly, "I tried to get back sooner. I should have been here." Jackson welcomed her presence. Olivia represented his life before betrayal and revenge. "I consumed it." They had grown up in a stable, loving Arizona household with parents who emphasized education and integrity. Olivia had inherited their mother's warmth and intuition, while Jackson had taken after their father's analytical mind and reserved. As they shared a simple dinner, Olivia asked the question no one else had dared. "What happens after, Jack? When this is all over and they re-imprison? What does your life look like?" Jackson stared at his plate. "I have not thought that far ahead. That's what scares me," Olivia said gently. "You've poured everything into destroying them. All that energy go when they already destroyed." "They destroyed my life first," Jackson replied, his voice hardening. "They took everything from me." "Not everything," Olivia countered. "Not your brilliance. Not your family. Not your future." Diana and Richard attempted something monstrous, but they only succeed if you let their actions define the rest of your life. The conversation continued late into the night, with Olivia neither judging nor dismissing Jackson's need for justice, but gently challenging him to imagine a future beyond revenge. For the first time since discovering the conspiracy, Jackson allowed himself to consider what healing, not just physical but emotional, might actually look like. The next morning, as Jackson prepared to attend what was expected to be the final day of testimony, he received an urgent call from Sophia. "Something's happened," she said, her voice tight with stress. "Richard Whitman is dead." "What? How?" Jackson demanded, immediately alert. "Found in his cell this morning. Preliminary indications suggest suicide, but given the circumstances, they re-investigating all possibilities." Richard's death threw the proceedings in a chaos. Diana's defense immediately moved from a trial, arguing that Richard's testimony, now unable to be fully cross-examined, prejudiced the jury. The prosecution countered that sufficient evidence existed independent of Richard's statements. The judge ultimately denied the mistrial motion, but instructed jurors to weigh Richard's testimony with particular care given the inability to complete cross-examination. The development added another macabre twist to a case already filled with betrayal and violence. For Jackson, Richard's death represented neither victory nor defeat, but another complication in an increasingly chaotic scenario he could no longer fully control. The architect of vengeance found his carefully designed structure absorbing unexpected stresses, forcing continuous redesign and adaptation. As Diana's trial moved to closing arguments, Jackson realized that regardless of the verdict, the crossfire of revenge had left no one unscathed. Not Diana, not Richard, not their associates, and certainly not Jackson himself. The question remained whether anyone could emerge from such devastation capable of building something new. Chapter 7: Pyrrhic Victories. The jury needed only 7 hours to reach their verdict. Diana S. was found guilty on all counts. Conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, assault with intent to kill, and poisoning. The courtroom fell silent as the 4 women announced guilty repeatedly. Each word another nail in the coffin of Diana's freedom. Diana herself showed little reaction beyond a slight stiffening of her shoulders. Her eyes fixed on some middle distance revealed nothing of her thoughts as the judge scheduled sentencing for 3 weeks later. Jackson, seated beside Sophia, felt the strange hollowness that had become familiar. A void where triumph should have been. The conviction represented the culmination of months of meticulous planning and legal maneuvering, yet brought none of the satisfaction he had anticipated. Outside the courthouse, reporters surrounded him shouting questions about justice and closure. Jackson delivered the statement he had prepared. Today's verdict confirms what the evidence clearly showed, that Diana Reeves and Richard Whitman conspired to murder me for financial gain. While nothing can undo the physical and emotional damage their actions caused, I am grateful to the prosecutors, investigators, and jurors who ensured accountability. The words sounded rehearsed even to his own ears. Platitudes that failed to capture the complex reality of what had occurred. When a reporter asked if the verdict brought closure, Jackson hesitated before answering honestly. I'm not sure closure exists for something like this. In the weeks before sentencing, Jackson faced a decision that exemplified his evolving perspective. Diana's defense team approached Sophia about Jackson making a statement at sentencing that might influence the judge toward leniency. They're desperate, Sophia explained during a meeting at her office. Without your statement, she's looking at 30 years minimum, possibly life. With a supportive statement from you as the victim, she might get 20 to 25 years. Why would I support leniency? Jackson asked, genuine confusion in his voice. You would not, Sophia clarified, but they were hoping to appeal to whatever remnants of feeling you might have for someone you remarried to for nearly a decade. Jackson considered the request he applied to engineering problems. Diana deserved maximum punishment by any objective measure. Yet the engineer in him recognized that even the most comprehensive prison sentence would not restore what had been taken from him. I'll speak at the sentencing. Jackson decided, but not to request leniency. When the day arrived, the courtroom was packed with media and spectators eager to witness the final chapter of case that had captivated Boston for months. Diana, dressed in a modest navy suit that contrasted sharply with her usual stylish attire, sat with perfect posture beside her attorney, her expression carefully neutral. Judge Eleonora Morez, known for her no-nonsense approach and thoughtful sentencing decisions, invited Jackson to make his victim impact statement. He approached the podium slowly. His cane now used more from habit than necessity. His physical recovery having progressed significantly despite the emotional trauma. Jackson looked directly at Diana for the first time since the trial began. Their eyes met briefly before she looked away, unable to maintain contact. He began speaking without reference to notes, his voice steady and clear. Your Honor, I thought carefully about what to say today. The prosecution has established beyond doubt that Diana Reeves conspired to murder me. First through a staged car accident that nearly killed me and left me with injuries unmanageable the rest of my life, then through systematic poisoning when the first attempt failed. He paused, gathering thoughts that had crystallized only recently. The calculated nature of these crimes, the cold with which my death was planned while my wife pretended to love me, warrants the maximum sentence under law, but I'm not here to request specific punishment. The court will determine appropriate consequences based on legal standards, not my personal desires for retribution. Jackson shifted slightly, his gaze moving from the judge to Diana. Instead, I want to address something more fundamental. When I discovered this conspiracy, I channeled all my energy into ensuring justice. Into making sure Diana and Richard Whitman face consequences for what they've done. That pursuit consumed me entirely. It became my purpose, my identity, my reason for continuing my recovery. In that process, I nearly lost myself. The architect designing their destruction risked becoming something unrecognizable. Someone defined solely by vengeance rather than by the values and connections that make life meaningful. Diana looked up, surprise evident in her expression as Jackson continued. I do not forgive Diana Reeves. What she did was unforgivable, but I recognize now that allowing her actions to determine the course of my remaining life would represent a different kind of death, a spiritual and emotional one that would ultimately give her a victory she does not deserve. Whatever sentence is imposed today, Diana will eventually leave prison. She'll have an opportunity to rebuild some version of a life. I want the court to know that I've decided to do the same, not to wait for her punishment to bring me peace, but to reclaim my life independent of what happens to her. Jackson turned directly to Diana, his voice dropping slightly but remaining clear enough for all to hear. You failed to kill me twice. First with the truck, then with the poison. I want to allow you to kill who I am through my own need for revenge. That's the final victory you will not have. Jackson returned his seat, feeling lighter than he had in months. The statement represented neither forgiveness nor weakness, but a reclamation of agency beyond the framework of victim and avenger. Judge Ramirez thanked Jackson for his statement before addressing Diana directly. Ms. Reeves, the crimes for which you've been convicted represent profound betrayal and calculated cruelty. You exploited the trust of marriage to plan the murder of your husband for financial gain, showing complete disregard for human life and the most basic ethical principles. The judge reviewed the evidence, emphasizing the permutation, the multiple attempts, and Diana's lack of genuine remorse throughout proceedings. When she finally announced the sentence, life imprisonment with possibility of parole after 30 years, Diana's composed facade cracked slightly, her shoulders slumping as the reality of spending decades in prison solidified. As Diana was led away in handcuffs, she glanced back at Jackson. Their eyes met briefly, a final wordless exchange between two people who had once shared everything and now shared nothing except the ruins of what they had destroyed. Outside the courthouse, Olivia waited for Jackson. You okay? She asked as they walked slowly toward the car, ignoring reporters shouting questions. Not yet, Jackson answered honestly, but I think I will be. In the following weeks, Jackson began dismantling the architecture of vengeance he had constructed. He sold the colonial house he had shared with Diana, donating most of the furnishings to organizations supporting domestic violence survivors. He concluded civil litigation against Diana and Richard estate, with settlements directed primarily toward restitution for Richard's previous victims. The engineering firm that had placed Jackson on leave approached him about returning, impressed by his handling of the trial and sentencing. Jackson declined, recognizing that his professional passion required a fresh start untainted by association with the case. Instead, he accepted a position with an innovative structural engineering company in Seattle, a city where rain might remind him of the day his life changed, but where few people would immediately connect him to the sensational Boston case. The physical distance would provide space to rebuild identity beyond victimhood and vengeance. Before leaving Boston, Jackson visited those who had supported him throughout the ordeal. Beverly Washington received a substantial gift toward her retirement and a promise of ongoing friendship. Dr. Patel accepted Jackson's gratitude and made him promise to continue physical therapy in Seattle. Tara Washington agreed to occasional consulting projects, having proven himself not just a skilled investigator, but a loyal friend. The most difficult farewell was with Sophia Brennan. Their professional relationship had evolved into something approaching friendship, bound by the intensity of the case and mutual respect. What we do now that Boston's most notorious attempted murder is resolved? Jackson asked as they shared a final lunch. Sophia smiled slightly, returned to the less sensational cases that do not make national news. Though I've been approached about writing a book about this one, will you do it? Not unless you're comfortable with it, she replied, and not until enough time has passed for perspective. Jackson considered this. Maybe someday, when it feels more like history and less like my life. As their lunch concluded, Sophia handed Jackson an envelope. This arrived at the office for you. Given the sender, I thought you might want privacy when reading it. The return address showed the Women's Correctional Facility, where Diana was serving her sentence. Jackson stared at the envelope, uncertain whether to open it or discard it unread. Whatever it says does not change anything, Sophia offered gently. But sometimes knowing is better than wondering. Jackson thanked her and tucked the envelope into his jacket. That evening, in a temporary apartment that contained only essentials as he prepared for relocation, Jackson finally opened Diana's letter. The handwriting was familiar yet different, more cramped than the flowing script he remembered, as though physical confinement had transferred to her penmanship. The letter was brief. Jack, I do not expect forgiveness or even understanding. Why did it is unforgivable. I've accepted that I'll spend most or all of my remaining life in prison, and that I deserve this punishment. Your statement and my sentencing surprised me. I expected hatred demands for maximum punishment. Instead, you spoke about reclaiming your life. It made me realize I never really knew you, or perhaps worse, knew but could not appreciate the strength of character that defined you. The psychiatrists here have diagnosed conditions that supposedly explain my actions. Perhaps they rewrite, but explanation is not excuse. I chose to betray you, to plan your death, to poison the person who had trusted me completely. No diagnosis changes those facts. I'm writing not to seek forgiveness, but to acknowledge truth, to take responsibility without excuses or justifications. You deserve better than what I gave you. You deserve better than who I was. I hope you find happiness in whatever life you build next. Not because I have any right to wish anything for you, but because it would mean I failed completely, failed to destroy the good and you even when I tried to destroy everything else. Diana. Jackson read the letter twice before folding it carefully, and placing it in a folder with other documents related to the case. The words offered neither comfort nor additional pain. Simply information to be acknowledged and filed away as he prepared for departure. 3 days later, Jackson boarded a flight to Seattle, carrying minimal luggage and maximal determination to build something new from the foundations of what had been destroyed. The architect of vengeance had completed that structure and now turned his skills toward a different design, not of retribution but of reconstruction. As the plane lifted off, Jackson gazed at Boston receding below. The city where he had nearly died twice, once from physical trauma, once from consuming rage. The pure nature of his victory had ultimately taught him what true survival required. Not just punishment of those who had harmed him, but reclamation of identity beyond the harm itself. The revenge had been executed with precision, the legal battles won, the conspirators punished. Yet the most significant victory was not what Jackson had done to Diana and Richard, but what he had prevented them from doing to him, defining the remainder of his life through their betrayal. As Boston disappeared beneath clouds, Jackson turned his gaze forward, toward a future he would design. He had once applied to destruction, but with a fundamentally different purpose. The architect's new project was himself. Chapter 8 Aftershocks. Seattle greeted Jackson with persistent rain and blessed anonymity. The city's technology-focused culture meant his colleagues at Wall of Structural Innovation were more interested in his engineering expertise than his personal history. When occasional recognition occurred, someone connecting him to the sensational Boston case, people generally respected his privacy after initial curiosity. Jackson leased a modern apartment overlooking Puget Sound, its minimalist design and sweeping views providing both comfort and perspective. Each morning, he watched ferries crossing the water while rebuilding physical strength through swimming and carefully designed exercises. His apartment contained no momentum from his previous life with Diana, only professional achievements and new acquisitions that reflected current taste rather than shared history. 6 months into this fresh start, Jackson had established new routines and professional respect to the firm. His specialty in designing earthquake-resistant structures proved valuable in the seismically active Pacific Northwest, and his approach to complex engineering problems earned appreciation from colleagues and clients. Yet, aftershocks from Boston continued to reverberate through his carefully reconstructed life. Media interest periodically spiked, particularly after Richard Whitman's death was officially ruled suicide. Though questions remained about whether someone with connections to his financial crimes might have arranged the suicide to prevent further testimony. More significantly, Veronica Slater, the girlfriend of Lawrence Peterson, one of Richard's previous victims, filed a civil suit against Jackson, claiming his vigilante investigation had interfered with official procedures and delayed justice for Lawrence. Though legally dubious, the suit generated fresh headlines connecting Jackson to the case he was attempting to leave behind. Jackson's attorney, Harold Greenberg, handled the Slater suit efficiently, providing evidence that Jackson's investigation had actually accelerated justice for Lawrence by uncovering evidence police had missed. The suit was eventually dismissed, but it served as a reminder that the past could not be neatly contained through geographic relocation alone. Professional success provided structure, but not necessarily fulfillment. Jackson excelled at his work, but found himself maintaining emotional distance from colleagues, reluctant to form connections that might lead to vulnerability. The betrayal by Diana had created lasting damage to his capacity for trust. Damage he recognized but struggled to repair. Dr. Rosalind Chun, a trauma psychologist Jackson reluctantly began seeing at Olivia's insistence, addressed this directly during their sessions. "You physically relocated and professionally re-established yourself," she observed. "But emotionally, you still living in a fortress designed to prevent another betrayal. Is that unreasonable after what happened?" Jackson asked, genuine curiosity in his voice. "Not unreasonable, no, but potentially limiting." Dr. Chun's straightforward manner reminded him somewhat of Beverly. Protective measures serve a purpose after trauma. The question is whether they still serving you or now constraining you. These conversations prompted Jackson to recognize patterns in his new life. How he maintained cordial professional relationships, but withdrew from deeper connections, how he dated occasionally, but ensured relationships remained casual. How he had rebuilt external structures while internal architecture remained shaped by betrayal. 9 months after relocating to Seattle, Jackson received news that created another significant aftershock. Beverly Washington called to inform him that Diana had been brutally attacked and imprisoned by another inmate. Reportedly the sister of a woman who had lost her husband in one of Richard Whitman's previous insurance schemes. "She's in the prison hospital," Beverly explained, "pretty badly hurt, broken jaw, orbital fracture, internal injuries. The doctors say she'll recover, but what?" Jackson prompted when Beverly hesitated. "But there's talk that it was not random. That someone connected to Richard's victims arranged it, sending a message that as the accomplices would face consequences beyond legal punishment." The news triggered complex emotions. Jackson did not wish additional suffering on Diana. Her legal punishment seemed sufficient. Yet he could not summon genuine sympathy either. Mostly, he felt a detached concern that violence against Diana might somehow entangle him in fresh investigations or media attention. He instructed Harold to communicate clearly to authorities that he had no involvement with or knowledge of the attack. Beyond that, Jackson deliberately avoided following developments in Diana's situation, recognizing that renewed focus on her would undermine his efforts to move forward. A more welcome interruption to Jackson's carefully structured routine came when Olivia announced she was getting married. Her fiancé, Gabriel Morales, taught at the same international school in Bangkok, where Olivia had been working when Diana's case unfolded. They planned a small ceremony in Arizona near their parents' retirement community. "I need you there, Jack," Olivia said during their weekly video call. "Not just attending, really there, present and engaged, not walled off." The request represented the first significant test of Jackson's ability to participate fully in emotional family events since the trauma. He understood what Olivia was asking. Not merely physical attendance, but emotional availability beyond the carefully maintained control that characterizes interactions since discovering Diana's betrayal. Jackson arrived in Phoenix 3 days before the wedding, giving himself time to acclimate to family dynamics and the desert heat so different from Seattle's moderate climate. His parents, now in their 70s, but still active and sharp, welcomed him with the uncomplicated love that had always characterized their relationship, asking about his work, but respecting his boundaries regarding Diana. Meeting Gabriel provided unexpected insights. Olivia's fiancé, a warm, thoughtful man with an easy laugh and serious eyes, approached Jackson with neither the awkward avoidance nor morbid curiosity that characterized many new acquaintances since the case. "Olivia talks about you constantly," Gabriel said, as they shared beers on his parents' patio, the brilliant big brother who taught her to question everything and find her own answers. Jackson smiled slightly. "That was before. I'm not sure that person still exists." Gabriel considered this without rushing to contradict. "Trauma changes people. I worked with refugee children before teaching, so I've seen that reality, but the core usually remains, even when it is surrounded by new protective layers." This straightforward acknowledgement, neither minimizing the impact of trauma nor defining Jackson solely through it, created space for genuine connection. Throughout the pre-wedding activities, Jackson found himself gradually lowering defenses, participating more fully in family moments, and even sharing occasional laughter that did not feel forced. The wedding itself, held at sunset in a desert botanical garden, provided a powerful counterpoint to the dissolution of Jackson's own marriage. Watching Olivia and Gabriel exchange vows based on realistic understanding rather than idealized romance, Jackson recognized possibilities he had previously dismissed. The trust could be built on clear-eye assessment rather than blind faith that connection did not necessarily require vulnerability to betrayal. During the reception, Jackson found himself approached by Gabriel's sister Elena, a civil rights attorney whose sharp intelligence and direct manner intrigued him. Their conversation moved easily from professional interests to travel experiences to favorite Seattle restaurants. Elena had attended law school at the University of Washington. Olivia mentioned what you went through in Boston. Elena said eventually, her tone matter-of-fact rather than pitying. That kind of betrayal would change anyone's perspective on trust. It has, Jackson acknowledged. I'm still figuring out what healthy caution looks like versus paralyzing suspicion. Elena nodded. That's the real recovery work. Not just healing from what happened, but determining how it shapes your approach to what comes next without letting it dictate everything. They exchanged contact information before the evening ended. With Elena mentioning, she occasionally visited Seattle for legal conferences. Jackson found himself genuinely interested in seeing her again. The first such interest he had allowed himself since Diana, returning to Seattle after the wedding. Jackson carried more than memories of a joyful family occasion. He returned with a shifting perspective on his own isolation. Recognition that while self-protection had been necessary during acute trauma, perpetual emotional fortification might represent capitulation to what Diana and Richard had tried to accomplish. This evolving perspective influenced Jackson's response when Sophia Brennan contacted him about a book proposal. Multiple publishers had approached her to write a definitive account of the case, and she wanted Jackson's input and potentially his participation. I've declined previous offers because it felt too soon, Sophia explained during a video call. But with Richard's death officially ruled suicide in Diana, serving her sentence, enough time may have passed for thoughtful analysis rather than sensationalism. Jackson considered the proposition carefully. Participating would mean revisiting painful experiences. It also offered opportunity to shape the narrative rather than having it defined by others. Additionally, Sophia's involvement ensured factual accuracy and appropriate respect for the serious nature of the crimes. What kind of participation did you have in mind? He asked. Interviews about your experience. Review of draft chapters for accuracy. Input on how certain aspects are framed, Sophia outlined. I would not proceed without your approval. And you have significant editorial input. What proceeds benefit Richard's other victims? This consideration felt important to Jackson. Ensuring the project served justice beyond merely revisiting sensational details. I've already structured a profit-sharing agreement that directs a significant percentage to victim advocacy organizations. Sophia confirmed. I anticipated that would be important to you. Jackson agreed to collaborate with specific boundaries regarding privacy and tone. The decision represented another step in reclaiming narrative control, acknowledging what had happened while refusing to be defined exclusively by victimhood. 13 months after relocating to Seattle, Jackson received a promotion to lead designer for a revolutionary earthquake-resistant condominium project. The assignment recognized both his technical brilliance and his emerging leadership skills as he had begun mentoring younger engineers with a patience and engagement that surprised colleagues who had initially perceived him as brilliant but distant. The promotion coincided with two significant personal developments. First, Jackson and Elena Morales had begun dating long distance with monthly visits between Seattle and San Francisco, where Elena had recently joined a prestigious civil rights firm. Their relationship developed with deliberate slowness and mutual respect for boundaries. Elena understanding Jackson's trust issues, Jackson appreciating her directness and independence. Second, Jackson initiated contact with survivors of Richard Whitman's previous victims, offering both information about the case and financial support from the settlement funds he had secured. These connections provided perspective beyond his personal experience, highlighting how Richard's predatory patterns had destroyed multiple lives over many years. Maureen Peterson, Lawrence's sister, particularly impacted Jackson when they met in Portland, neutral territory for both. Her grief remained raw years after her brother's death, but she had channeled it into advocacy for greater oversight of financial advisors and insurance fraud prevention. For 3 years, police dismissed my concerns about Lawrence's death. Maureen explained over coffee. If you had not exposed Richard's pattern, we might never have known the truth. Your investigation gave us answers, if not comfort. I wish I had discovered it sooner, Jackson admitted. Before Diana and Richard targeted others, Maureen studied him thoughtfully. You know, the hardest part of losing someone a murder, the way it forces you to re-examine every memory, questioning what was real and what was manipulation. Lawrence trusted Veronica completely. Learning she helped plan his death contaminated even good memories from before she entered his life. Jackson nodded, recognizing the same pattern in his own experience. How Diana's betrayal had retrospectively tainted their entire relationship, making him question whether any genuine connection had existed or if everything had been calculated deception. How do you move forward with that knowledge? He asked. You accept that both realities might be true simultaneously. Maureen answered after consideration. Lawrence's love was genuine even if Veronica's was not. Your goodness as a husband existed independently of Diana's betrayal. Their actions reveal their character, not yours. This conversation marked a significant turning point in Jackson's recovery. Permission to preserve aspects of his past identity while still acknowledging the reality of betrayal. He did not need to abandon entirely the person he had been before discovering Diana's plot. He could integrate that person into who he was becoming after surviving. 18 months after leaving Boston, Jackson faced another significant aftershock when Diana's appeal reached the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court. Her attorneys argued that Richard's suicide during trial had prejudiced proceedings, preventing full cross-examination of key testimony. The appeal generated fresh media coverage and required Jackson to provide additional statements through the court ultimately upheld Diana's conviction, finding that sufficient evidence existed independent of Richard's testimony. However, the proceedings created another cycle of public attention just as Jackson had begun feeling established in his new identity. This renewed attention coincided with completion of Sophia's book manuscript. Reviewing chapters about his own experience proved unexpectedly therapeutic for Jackson. Seeing events rendered rather than through the emotional fog of trauma provided distance and perspective he had previously lacked. Sophia had titled the book Calculated Betrayal, a phrase that captured both the planning behind the murder attempts and the fundamental violation of trust they represented. The manuscript successfully balanced factual detail with respect for the human impact of the crimes, avoiding both sensationalism and minimization. 2 years after relocating to Seattle, Jackson had established a life that incorporated his trauma without being defined by it. His professional success continued with innovative designs that attracted industry recognition. His relationship with Elena had deepened into genuine partnership based on mutual respect and clear-eyed communication. His connections with family had strengthened, particularly through regular visits with Olivia and Gabriel, who had relocated to Vancouver, British Columbia, close enough for weekend visits. When Beverly Washington called to inform Jackson that Diana had been diagnosed with aggressive ovarian cancer, his reaction surprised him. Instead of indifference or satisfaction, he felt a complex sadness, not for Diana specifically, but for the comprehensive tragedy that had encompassed so many lives, including hers. The doctors give her maybe a year, Beverly explained. She's requested compassionate release to a medical facility, but it's unlikely to be granted given the nature of her crimes. What does she need? Jackson asked, the question emerging before he had fully processed its implications. Beverly hesitated. Medical care beyond what the prison system provides. Her parents are deceased and she has no family advocating for her. Without outside intervention, she'll receive minimal palliative care as the disease progresses. Jackson considered his options carefully. Direct involvement seemed inappropriate given their history. Yet complete disregard felt equally wrong. Eventually, he arranged through Harold to establish an anonymous fund for Diana's medical needs, with Beverly serving as liaison to ensure appropriate care without direct contact. This decision represented neither forgiveness nor reconciliation but recognition of shared humanity that transcended even the most profound betrayal. Jackson could acknowledge Diana's fundamental worth as a human being while maintaining necessary boundaries regarding her role in his life. When Elena questioned this choice during a weekend visit, Jackson explained his reasoning. Ensuring basic medical care does not mean forgetting what she did. It means refusing to allow her actions to determine who I become. Elena studied him thoughtfully. You've changed since we first met at Olivia's wedding. There's less armor. Is that good or bad? Jackson asked, genuinely curious about her perception. Good, I think. You're still careful about trust, still analytical about relationships. But there's more possibility, less predetermined conclusion that everything ends in betrayal. Her observation aligned with Jackson's own sense of gradual transformation, not dramatic redemption or complete healing, but incremental reclamation of capacity for connection despite knowledge of its potential risks. The Seattle condominium project neared completion. Its distinctive design reflecting both mathematical precision and aesthetic. Jackson took Elena on a tour of the nearly finished structure, explaining how its innovative support systems would allow the building to flex during seismic events rather than resist and potentially fracture. It's almost a metaphor for resilience, Elena observed as they stood on the rooftop overlooking Puget Sound. Not rigidity that breaks under pressure, but strategic flexibility that preserves structural integrity during stress. Jackson considered this parallel. I never thought of it that way, but you're right. The strongest structures are not those that never move. They're those designed to absorb impact and return a form. As the sun set over the Olympic Mountains, Jackson reflected on the aftershocks that had continued to impact his carefully reconstructed life. Each one had initially threatened stability but ultimately contributed to a more resilient structure. Not the impervious fortress he had initially attempted to build, but something more adaptable and ultimately stronger. The revenge he had so meticulously designed had succeeded in its primary objective. Diana and Richard had faced justice for their crimes. Yet the most significant victory had emerged not from their punishment but from his own refusal to remain defined by their betrayal. The architect of vengeance had ultimately designed something far more challenging and meaningful, a life that acknowledged trauma without surrendering to it, that permitted connection despite knowledge of its risks. That recognized how strength derived not from imperviousness to damage, but from capacity to rebuild after devastation. As darkness fell over Seattle, Jackson took Elena's hand, a simple gesture that would have seemed impossible in the immediate aftermath of betrayal. The aftershocks would likely continue, diminishing in intensity but never entirely disappearing. The difference now was that each tremor no longer threatened to collapse what he had rebuilt, but simply reminded him of the ongoing nature of recovery. Not a destination, but a continuing process of design and adaptation. Chapter 9, Foundations Rebuilt. 3 years after leaving Boston, Jackson Reeves stood at the podium of a Seattle architectural conference, presenting his award-winning design for earthquake-resistant residential structures. The innovation had earned industry recognition and was being implemented in seismically vulnerable communities worldwide, potentially saving countless lives in future disasters. As he explained the mathematical principles underlying the design, Jackson detected familiar faces in the audience. Olivia and Gabriel had traveled from Vancouver for the presentation. Elena sat in the front row, her proud smile providing steady encouragement. Even Terrell Washington had flown in from Boston, his presence representing continuity between Jackson's past and present. The presentation concluded to enthusiastic applause, with industry leaders approaching afterward to discuss implementation possibilities. Jackson answered questions with confidence and precision. His professional identity now fully re-established, independent of the notorious case that had once threatened to define him. Later that evening, celebrating with loved ones at a waterfront restaurant, Jackson experienced a moment of clarity about his journey. The conversation flowed easily among people who knew his full story yet saw him as more than the sum of his trauma. The architect had successfully designed not just innovative buildings but a life with new foundations. To Jackson, Terrell proposed a toast, raising his glass. Who showed me that true strength is not about avoiding destruction but about what you build afterward. The sentiment captured what Jackson had gradually realized. That survival alone was not the victory. The victory lay in reclaiming possibility, rebuilding capacity for trust, and refusing to allow betrayal to determine his future connections. Professionally, Jackson had transcended his role at Wall of Structural Innovation, establishing a subsidiary focused specifically on resilient design for vulnerable communities. The initiative partnered with international organizations to implement affordable structural solutions in earthquake-prone regions with limited resources, transforming personal trauma into global impact. His relationship with Elena had evolved into committed partnership based on mutual respect and clear communication. They maintained separate residences. Elena's work in San Francisco and Jackson's in Seattle created natural independence, but shared a profound connection built on honesty rather than idealized expectations. We should discuss next steps. Elena suggested as they walked along the waterfront after dinner. My firm has offered position in their Seattle office and I'm considering accepting. Jackson appreciated her directness. The lack of manipulation or hidden agenda that characterized all their important conversations. How would you feel about living together if you moved here? Honestly, both excited and cautious, Elena answered. We've built something good with our current arrangement, changing it carries risks. This healthy acknowledgement of reality rather than romantic idealization represented exactly what Jackson valued in their relationship. We could approach it perhaps a 6-month trial period with clear evaluation criteria. Elena laughed, squeezing his hand. Only you would suggest relationship milestones with evaluation criteria. To engineering focused, Jackson asked, smiling slightly. Perfectly you focused, Elena corrected, and I appreciate knowing exactly where we stand. Their mutual comfort with incremental commitment reflected Jackson's transformed approach to trust. Neither reckless optimism nor paralyzing suspicion, but calculated risk based on observed patterns and transparent communication. Meanwhile, Sophia Brennan's book Calculated Betrayal had been published to critical acclaim and strong sales. The thoughtful treatment of the case provided context beyond sensationalist headlines, exploring psychological, financial, and legal dimensions of the conspiracy. Jackson had initially worried about renewed public attention but found the comprehensive narrative actually reduced strangers' morbid curiosity as the book answered questions that might otherwise have been directed to him personally. More significantly, proceeds benefited both direct victims of Richard and Diana's crimes and broader advocacy for financial oversight and victim support. The book's impact extended beyond storytelling to actual systemic reform, with several states implementing Whitman law as strengthening penalties for financial advisors involved in exploited practices. Jackson maintained appropriate professional contact with Sophia, who occasionally consulted him regarding media inquiries or legal developments related to the case. Their relationship had evolved from victim-prosecutor to something approaching friendship, bound by shared commitment to preventing similar crimes. News from Boston arrived periodically through Beverly Washington, who had retired from a rehabilitation facility but maintained contact with Jackson through regular calls and occasional Beverly reported developments with characteristic directness, neither softening information nor adding unnecessary judgment. Diana's health had deteriorated rapidly, the cancer progressing despite treatment funded through Jackson's anonymous arrangement. According to Beverly, she remained largely isolated in the prison medical ward, having rejected most visitors except for a chaplain who provided spiritual counseling during her decline. She's asked about you several times, Beverly mentioned during a visit to Seattle, not directly, but wondering how you redoing whether you've rebuilt your life. What do you tell her? Jackson asked, curious rather than concerned. The truth that you redoing well professionally and personally, that you've moved forward without letting what happened define you completely. Beverly studied him with her characteristic perceptiveness. Does it bother you that I share that much? Jackson considered the question. No, it's factual information, not intimate details. And perhaps knowing her actions did not ultimately destroy me is appropriate consequence. But despite everything I've rebuilt while she's lost everything. Beverly nodded approvingly. That's healthy perspective, acknowledging impact without vindictiveness. You've come a long way from the man calculating maximum destruction in a hospital room. This observation aligned with Jackson's own sense of transformation. The architect of vengeance had initially designed punishment he applied to buildings, calculating stress points, planning collapse, ensuring complete destruction. Yet the most significant design had emerged afterward. The reconstruction of identity and capacity for connection despite knowledge of betrayal's possibility. 4 months after the architectural conference, Jackson received news that permanently closed a chapter of his past. Diana Reeves had died in the prison medical facility. Her body claimed by a distant cousin for private burial. No service was announced, no obituary published. The final erasure of a life that had ultimately been defined by deception and harm. Jackson processed this information with self-awareness about his reactions. There was no satisfaction in Diana's death. No sense of justice beyond what the legal system had already provided. Instead, he felt a complex mixture of emotions. Residual sadness for possibilities lost, relief that the threat she represented was permanently ended, and recognition that her death changed nothing fundamental about his own recovery journey. He declined media requests for issued no statements, attended no services. Instead, he made a substantial anonymous donation to ovarian cancer research, acknowledging Diana's humanity without personal involvement in her death or remembrance. Elena, who had recently accepted the Seattle position and moved into Jackson's apartment for their trial period, supported his measured response. "Your reaction shows how far you've come. Neither celebration nor performative grief, just appropriate recognition of a complex reality." Their shared living arrangement progressed more smoothly than either had anticipated. Elena's presence transformed Jackson's meticulously ordered space into something warmer and more spontaneous without disrupting the functionality he valued. Their different approaches, Jackson's precision and Elena's adaptability, complemented rather than conflicted, creating balance neither would have achieved individually. 5 months into their cohabitation, they decided to make the arrangement permanent, purchasing a modern home overlooking Lake Washington with space for Elena's home office and Jackson's architectural drafting studio. The decision emerged from careful evaluation rather than emotional impulse. Exactly the approach Jackson had suggested, and that suited them both. On moving day, Olivia and Gabriel flew from Vancouver to help with the transition as they arranged furniture and unpacked essentials. Olivia pulled Jackson aside for a private conversation on the deck overlooking the lake. "Do you remember what I asked you that night after Diana's trial?" She began referencing their conversation years earlier. "About what happens after revenge is completed." Jackson nodded, recalling the question that had initially left him without answer. "You've answered it beautifully." Olivia continued, gesturing toward the home being established inside. "Not with words, but with actions. You've built something that honors who you were before the betrayal while incorporating what you learned through surviving it." Her observation articulated what Jackson had gradually realized. That meaningful recovery involved neither returning to the exact person he had been before trauma, nor becoming someone entirely disconnected from that earlier identity. Instead, he had integrated experiences into a more resilient, more aware version of himself, someone who understood both trust value and its risks. The following spring brought another milestone when Wallace Structural Innovation spun off Jackson's Resilient Initiative as an independent nonprofit organization, with Jackson serving as executive director while maintaining design involvement. The Resilient Design Institute partnered with universities, governments, and NGOs to implement earthquake-resistant structures in vulnerable communities globally. At the Institute's launch event, Jackson delivered remarks that reflected his personal philosophy as much as his professional mission. Structural resilience is not about preventing damage entirely. That's often impossible given sufficient force. Rather, it's about designing systems that can absorb impact, adapt to pressure, and maintain core integrity even when surface elements are compromised. The most resilient structures are not necessarily the most rigid or impervious, but those designed with strategic flexibility and multiple support systems. The parallel to human resilience remained unspoken but informed every aspect of the Institute's approach, focusing not on creating invulnerable systems but on designing recovery capacity into inherently vulnerable ones. 5 years after leaving Boston, Jackson returned to the city for the Institute's East Coast Symposium. The visit represented his first professional return to the place where his life had been shattered and subsequently rebuilt. Elena accompanied him, providing both emotional support and practical partnership in navigating potentially triggering locations and situations. Boston had changed in the intervening years, with new buildings reshaping the skyline and different rhythms animating familiar streets. Jackson too had changed, physically stronger than during his recovery period, emotionally more integrated than during his revenge phase, professionally more established than when he had fled the city seeking anonymity. The symposium held at MIT's Architectural Center focused on implementing resilient design principles in historic urban environments, a fitting topic for a city balancing preservation and innovation. Jackson delivered the keynote address with confidence and authority. His reputation now based entirely on professional accomplishments rather than personal tragedy. During the visit, Jackson made 2 significant pilgrimages. First, he visited Beverly Washington at her home in Roxbury, where she had established a small community garden that served as gathering place for neighborhood's children. Their relationship had evolved from caregiver-patient to genuine friendship based on mutual respect and shared values. "You look good, Jack," Beverly observed as they shared tea in her kitchen. "Not just healthy, peaceful." "I feel relatively peaceful," Jackson acknowledged. "Not completed or perfectly healed, but steadily moving forward." Beverly nodded approvingly. "That's real recovery. Not some magical transformation, but daily progress in the right direction." The second pilgrimage proved more challenging emotionally. Jackson visited Massachusetts General Hospital, specifically the rehabilitation facility where he had begun both physical recovery and revenge planning. The building remained largely unchanged. Those staff had rotated and procedures modernized. Walking through corridors where he had once struggled with a walker, Jackson experienced powerful sense memories. The antiseptic smell, the particular quality of fluorescent lighting, the sound of medical equipment. Yet these triggers no longer activated trauma responses. They simply existed as artifacts of experience rather than gateways to emotional flooding. Dr. Patel still practicing though nearing retirement. "Welcome," Jackson warmly. "I tell you story to patients who believe they see a not recover," she admitted. Not the sensational aspects, but the reality of how determination combined with proper support can overcome even catastrophic injuries. "Do you include the revenge portion of the story?" Jackson asked with slight humor. "I focus on the physical recovery." Dr. Patel replied diplomatically. "Though I do emphasize how finding purpose. Any purpose can accelerate healing." Their conversation reinforced Jackson's understanding that recovery involved multiple dimensions. Physical, emotional, relational, professional. Advancement in one area supported progress in others, creating integrated healing rather than compartmentalized improvement. The Boston visit concluded without dramatic revelations or setbacks. Simply confirmation that Jackson could engage with his past without being consumed by it. The city that had witnessed his near destruction now witnessed his return as someone transformed but not erased by that experience. Returning to Seattle, Jackson and Elena resumed their carefully constructed life together. One built on clear communication, mutual respect, and shared values. Their relationship progressed not through romantic impulse but through deliberate choice. Each step forward representing conscious decision rather than societal expectation or emotional reaction. 7 years after leaving Boston, Jackson found himself in conversation with a young engineer who had joined a resilient design institute after experiencing personal trauma, surviving a bridge collapse that had killed several classmates during a university field trip. "How did you move past it?" the young woman asked her in a coffee break. "Not just professionally, but personally, how did you stop seeing yourself primarily as a survivor of something terrible?" Jackson considered the question carefully, recognizing its significance beyond professional mentorship. "I did not move past it so much as integrate it," he eventually answered. "The experience became part of my identity without becoming my entire identity." "But how?" she pressed. "Practically speaking, how did you prevent it from defining everything?" "By deliberately building other defining elements," Jackson explained, "professional accomplishments, meaningful relationships, community involvement. Each one providing additional identity anchors beyond victim or survivor." He continued, articulating insights developed over years of recovery and by recognizing that trauma changes but does not erase who you fundamentally are. "The person I was before, analytical, methodical, precise, still exists within the person I've become. Those traits were temporarily redirected toward revenge but ultimately reclaimed for construction rather than destruction." This conversation crystallized Jackson's understanding of his own journey. Not dramatic redemption or miraculous healing, but incremental reclamation and deliberate reconstruction. The architect who had designed elaborate revenge had ultimately created something far more challenging and meaningful, a life that acknowledged trauma's impact without surrendering to its limiting definitions. 8 years after leaving Boston, Jackson and Elena married in a simple ceremony overlooking Puget Sound, surrounded by family and close friends. Their vows reflected clear-eyed commitment rather than romantic fantasy. Promises based on observed patterns and demonstrative values rather than emotional projection or idealized expectations. The celebration afterward embodied the life Jackson had carefully designed, balancing structure with spontaneity, precision with warmth, careful planning with openness to unexpected joy. Olivia and Gabriel attended with her young daughter who had recently been named Jackson's goddaughter. Beverly Washington traveled from Boston despite advancing age, representing continuity between past and present. Tara Washington brought greetings from Sophia Brennan, who could not attend due to a major trial but sent heartfelt congratulations. During a quiet moment amid celebrations, Jackson stood alone on the venue's deck, watching afternoon light transformed the water into burnished gold. Elena joined him, slipping her hand into his with the easy familiarity they had developed. "Penny for your thoughts," she offered. "I was thinking about foundations," Jackson replied, "not just in buildings but in lives, how everything depends on what you build upon." Elena nodded, understanding the metaphor. "And what foundation have you built on?" Jackson considered the question carefully. "Not perfect trust, that would be naive after everything. Not permanent suspicion, that would be surrender to what was done to me." He paused, finding precise words for complex understanding. "I've built on calibrated trust, the willingness to connect despite known risks, with appropriate safeguards but without paralyzing fear." This foundation had supported not just their relationship but Jackson's entire rebuilt life, professional innovations, community engagement, family reconnections. The architect of vengeance had ultimately designed something far more enduring than retribution, a life that acknowledged betrayal's reality without allowing it to determine all future possibilities. As evening deepened into night, Jackson surveyed the gathering of people who had supported his reconstruction. Some from the beginning, others joining along the way. Each represented a deliberate connection made after trauma had taught the potential cost of trust. Each demonstrated his refusal to allow betrayal to determine his capacity for relationship. The revenge he had executed had served its purpose, ensuring justice and preventing harm to others. Yet the true victory lay not in Diana and Richard's punishment, but in Jackson's refusal to remain defined by their actions. The structure of retribution had been temporary. The architecture of recovery would endure. In the soft Pacific Northwest evening, surrounded by carefully chosen connections and deliberately built commitments, Jackson Reeves, engineer, survivor, rebuilt human, recognized the foundation beneath everything else. The choice to construct rather than merely survive, to design possibility rather than merely avoid further harm. The architect's most significant project had been himself. Not restored to exact previous specifications, but rebuilt with knowledge gained through devastation, designed to weather future storms without sacrificing essential integrity, not invulnerable, but resilient, not unchanged, but purposefully transformed. As Jackson rejoined the celebration, moving with barely perceptible trace of his once devastating injuries, he carried forward not the identity of victim or avenger, but of builder. Someone who had faced destruction and chosen deliberately and repeatedly to create again. Revenge had been calculated, precise, and ultimately successful, but the most meaningful calculation had come afterward. The complex equation of how to rebuild a life from fragments, how to design connection despite knowledge of betrayal's possibility, how to create foundation strong enough to support not just survival but genuine prosperity. The architect had succeeded in his most challenging design. A life where trauma existed as integrated experience rather than defining limitation, where betrayal was acknowledged but not given power to determine future trust, where revenge had served justice without becoming identity, where foundations, once shattered, have been not merely restored but rebuilt stronger, designed with knowledge of both stability and collapse, capable of supporting structures more resilient than those that had come before.